Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this session. So it's on new financing mechanisms for the social sector. So really, it's about social finance or decentralized social finance. It's kind of a pre-talk for one of the sessions, one of the working groups that we're going to be doing tomorrow. The starting point is that in the blockchain space, there's a lot of talk around decentralized finance. Generally, it's applied to gambling or games or property tech or whatever, but it's more rarely discussed within the social or environmental sector. And at the same time, the blockchain for good or blockchain for impact is also generally focused on frontline considerations. We don't talk enough sometimes about the general financial infrastructure, and so that's the objective of this. So we're just going to do a quick round of introductions. I'm going to be kind of a player manager. I'm Raphael. I'm the CEO of Alice. I'll tell you about that in a second, but maybe I will pass the mic on to Jill, who can tell you about what she's been doing at Binance.
Hi, everyone. This is Jill from the Blockchain Charity Foundation. And we are an initiative started by Binance, the exchange. And what we do is currently just ensure that we are providing a transparent donation system to all the donors. And we are trying to bring revolution to the traditional charity, because we all know that there are a lot of issues related to charity. It's not transparent at all. And what we provide is we help the donors to track their donations all the way down to the end beneficiaries. And we started this linkage and connection between the donors to the end beneficiaries. And we make sure that most of their donors' money are reaching the end beneficiaries instead of going to any third party or to any intermediaries or even like to corruption. So that is the problem we're tackling with. And we think because our projects currently are mostly based in Africa, and we're supporting like kids in Africa, providing them with free lunch with the donations from our donors. And there are many more projects I would love to share later. And yeah.
Thank you. I'm Tomicah Tillemann, and I'm the founder and director, and soon to be mic'd, founder of the Blockchain Trust Accelerator at New America. We are an organization that works with government, civil society, and the private sector to build out blockchain solutions that address governance and social impact challenges. We work with organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the State Department, do a lot of collaboration with the World Bank, and recently have been getting really excited about the potential for blockchain technology to provide greater transparency and accountability and efficiency in social sector finance. We're working on a couple of applications right now related to government transmission of foreign assistance dollars and trying to ensure that that's done as efficiently as possible, and also, as Jill was alluding to, with as little loss as possible due to corruption, malfeasance, which unfortunately in many instances is one of the largest drains on foreign assistance funding. We're excited about the early results, and we'll talk about this in greater detail, but our expectation is that this is going to be one of the most important long-term applications for blockchain around the social impact field generally. This is an area where big things are bound to happen.
Hi everyone, I'm Charlie Chesney. I'm a conservation innovator. I'm currently collaborating with WWF to help scale their new tech innovation hub called Panda Labs. And I'm facilitating the collaboration between them, EcoSulis, which is a consultancy firm in the UK, and the University of Oxford, to produce a technical brief which will outline all the different ways in which blockchain can be used for nature and society. We're focusing specifically on financial mechanisms. How do you lower transaction costs? How can you cheaply transfer money from donors down to on-the-ground workers? One of the things that I will be talking about later is payments for ecosystem services. So how can you use blockchain mechanisms and smart contracts to automatically transfer funds once proof of impact has been shared?
And I'm Raphael, as I said. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Alice. We're a decentralized social finance network that's been going since 2016. The way that it works is that we create incentives for social environmental projects that are launched on Alice to systematically track their impact. And the way that it works is it mixes payment by results mechanisms So for example, if you make a donation or a grant to a social project on Alice, the money will only be paid out as and when the delivery organization, the NGO, achieves its goals in a provable manner. We mix in impact investments, obviously, to provide funding up front so that charities aren't left out of pocket if they don't achieve their goals. And we mix that with smart contracts and blockchain technology. So it's partly to reduce the transaction costs, as Charlie was saying, because it can automate a lot of things. It can automate the payments, automate the reporting. But the great thing about it is also that it's fully transparent. So what we're trying to put an end to is the siloing of data in this space and restoring trust and confidence for funders. Some of the work that we've been doing recently is working with a huge UK-based charity called Cancer Research UK. We're based in London, if you haven't noticed from the accent. We are helping them manage their restricted donations, which amount to about $80 million a year. We're also working on some supportive housing projects that are allowing beneficiaries or tenants in supportive housing and social housing projects to be incentivized directly to take control of their lives, find jobs, deal with mental health issues. So it's not just payments going to charities, but to individuals themselves when they are achieving goals. So that's us. I think the thing that we wanted to touch upon first was obviously there's a lot of potential, great promise to using blockchain technology, smart contracts, etc. But when you get to implementing it and trying to roll it out in the real world, there are obviously a lot of challenges. And we all have quite a lot of experience with trying to roll them out in the real world. So maybe you can kick off by talking about some of the challenges that you've faced. I don't know who wants to start.
I can start. So of course, like a lot of people that we are dealing with is the bottom billion population, and especially those are like kids and parents. They're in the rural areas of Africa, and many people ask like, how are they able to understand the technology? How are they able to understand kind of the risks, and how are you able to provide this technology to them? So I think, yes, there are a lot of challenges on the ground, but we have to start somewhere to start to engage them in this like technology innovation. But how to make this accessible to people that's really in need, I think that's the question that we all want to ask and answer in our own endeavors. Because also like when we are talking about like decentralized finance or a lot of works that we are doing, we're engaging with a lot of different stakeholders, and each of them will face like different challenges when they're trying to engage and how to incentivize them to come into this system and provide their information and data to make this whole system work. That's also like something that we need to think about, and we need to think about from their shoes. For our team, like we work on the ground in Africa, trying to understand the challenges that's facing them, and trying to understand and we are working like improving the work that we're doing, and trying to make this technology more available and accessible to them. So I think that's a lot of things that I touch upon, but definitely I think like thinking for the stakeholders and thinking what they need is pretty important.
Couple of things. I think Jill makes some great points. It's important to acknowledge upfront that the existing systems that we are working with, especially in frontier markets, are really broken. And unless we come to the table with that realization, we're going to end up in a pretty bad place. Because when dealing with blockchain, it's not just a matter of garbage in, garbage out, but as my friend Sheila Warren always says, it's garbage in, garbage forever. And so you need to understand that the baseline data, the baseline systems that you're working with need to be brought up to standards if you want to end up in a good place. Beyond that, the other important realization we have had is that the single biggest potential source of funding in the medium term for these types of projects is the reduction in waste, fraud, abuse, and oversight that currently exist in these systems. If you use the UN numbers, about 30% of every dollar that's deployed for assistance or development expenditure in a frontier market is lost to waste, fraud, and abuse. Another 10 to 15% goes to monitoring and evaluation, trying to prevent those losses. And so what that means is that before you do anything, before you solve a single problem, before you help a single person, you've lost 45 cents on the dollar. That is an astonishing figure, but it's also an astonishing opportunity. And to the extent we can frame our work with an eye toward recapturing and repurposing some of that money that is currently going missing and putting it back into solving problems, we're going to be able to do a lot of good for a lot of people.
So in creating this brief that'll outline all the different ways blockchain can be used for nature and society, we've come across several of the same challenges that keep popping up in all the case studies. One of which is the acceptance of cryptocurrencies in remote communities. Yes, you can use smart contracts to directly and cheaply transfer, say, Ether from a donor directly to somebody on the ground in a community, but how are they going to actually use that cryptocurrency in their real life? And that then you need to introduce a third party, which is somebody or a company that can transfer the cryptocurrency to a local currency, which takes away some of the decentralization that blockchain affords. The other area in which there's a challenge is using blockchain and smart contracts to automate the sharing of impact data to unlock additional funds. Conservation is definitely not a sector that is that has a lot of funding, and a lot of conservation projects, especially small ones, do not have the funds to buy equipment that can communicate with Oracle services to automate the data sharing process. And so that is definitely a major hurdle that needs to be overcome. Either part of the funds need to go towards helping these conservation organizations get Internet of Things enabled cameras or access to satellite information or tracking collars that can be accessed remotely. That's quite a high initial startup cost.
And I think just to echo that, when you first fall into the blockchain rabbit hole, you're like, wow, this is going to change everything. And then you start to implement it and you're like, oh, wait a second, people don't know how to use a Web3 browser. What's these gas costs? You need to get Ether to interact with this. The usability of it is pretty poor. It's getting much, much better. And it's getting better really fast. But I think that was one of the first things that we came up against, especially in 2016 when we started. So we took the decision that we started with a donation platform, conditional donation platform, where you can donate directly to a project and see exactly what impact your money makes. But we didn't want to do it in cryptocurrencies because it can take some time for charities to achieve their goals, and you don't want any of the volatility. So there weren't any stable coins back then, like DAI, if you're familiar with that. So we needed to build a hybrid system that would allow people to donate in pounds or dollars, but keep that in a segregated account while representing it in smart contracts so you can have the transparency. But it's not very satisfying because it's still a hybrid system. So we're working little by little to fully integrate into the blockchain. I think that's one of the biggest ones. The other one is the regulatory framework. So part of our platform is dependent on impact investors providing upfront funding to projects. These are securities. You need to have a smart contract infrastructure that meshes with contractual agreements and the regulatory and compliance framework in whichever jurisdiction you're working in. Because, people love to say that dApps or DApps, decentralized applications, are unstoppable and no more censorship, etc. And that's true. The code can be unstoppable, but the founders can be put in jail, right? So you want to avoid that. So I think that those are some of the challenges. And by the way, we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for people to ask questions. The next thing, because several of us have touched upon it, one of the exciting applications of what we're doing of smart contracts is the ability to work with payment by results or things like social impact bonds. Can I just see a quick show of hands to see if you're familiar with social impact bonds or development impact bonds? Okay, so not everybody. The idea is that it's generally the government at the moment that rolls these out. They will want to deliver a service like helping homeless people find a home or building schools in a given area, but they'll only pay if the delivery organization, the NGO, actually achieves its goals. And because it takes money up front to start that, you need impact investors who provide the seed funding. So Alice, for example, was very inspired by that model. But the great thing about smart contracts, it can automate a lot of that. So Tomicah, maybe to kick off, can you tell us how you've been thinking about it and looking at it?
Yeah, I think we see 1.0 solutions and 2.0 solutions. The 1.0 solutions are going to be pretty narrow, and the 1.0 solutions, in some extent, are going to be limited by the immaturity of the ecosystem. They're going to be focused on solving one specific problem, and maybe if they get really fancy, they'll use a smart contract to do that. The 2.0 solutions will start to come online once you have blockchains talking to blockchains. And once we get to that point, you're going to have platforms that will be able to solve these problems far more effectively, far more efficiently than anything we have available today. I spent a long time at the State Department and had probably the best job in Washington. I ran a team that operated a lot like a venture fund, reporting directly to the Secretary of State. And our job was to look for solutions that could solve big problems around governance and then build out the tech talent, resources, and platforms that would make those solutions come to life. And there were many, many instances in which we were operating in a country where you were effectively guessing what was going to work. The availability of data was so poor, and the cycles between when you had to make decisions around investment and when you were going to get results back were so long that it was essentially a bunch of well-meaning people sitting in a room taking a stab in the dark and hoping that you were going to hit something that was going to move the needle a little bit. That's going to change, and that's going to change in a big way. It's going to change as you have digital governance platforms that can provide real-time feedback, and it's going to change as the process of doing A/B testing with interventions gets much easier and less expensive as you have platforms like Alice and others that allow for many different interventions to be tried in a relatively short period of time. So I think we are at the beginning of something that's going to be really exciting, but it's also important to recognize this could take a while. Neha Narula at MIT is fond of saying that while we often think of blockchain as being in the early 1990s, if we were to transpose it into internet terms, in reality we may be closer to the 1970s. And so we should recognize where we're headed. We should understand the potential here, but we should also acknowledge that before we get there, we're going to have to move and create a lot of new infrastructure that doesn't exist today. So, swing for the fence, but recognize that the ball may take a while to get there.
Charlie, maybe do you want to talk about some of the payment by results work you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you about payments for ecosystem services. So an ecosystem service would be something like paying somebody to plant trees to combat climate change, or paying a farmer to flood a field to create a pop-up habitat for migrating birds. The specific thing I'm going to talk about is a project called Wildlife Credits, which is taking place in Namibia between WWF Namibia and a researcher named Daniel Oberhauser in University of Oxford. So what they're doing is using smart contracts blockchain technology to provide payment to local communities upon proof that they have not developed land. And these are to maintain wildlife corridors to allow elephants to migrate safely through a national park. And so what they do is use Google Earth Engine and the satellite images to look at percent land change over a period of time. And if the percent land change remains under a specific percentage, it's proof that they have not developed the land, that they have maintained the land for environmental purposes, and a small amount of ether is transferred to the beneficiaries on the ground. And the problems with scaling this, like I said before, are how do you allow the communities on the ground to accept ether? How do you enable them to use ether in their everyday life? And maybe in the future it would be able to transfer a local currency, or enable their communities to be more accepting of a cryptocurrency. And this kind of project can be scaled up to other payments for ecosystem service projects as well.
And Jill?
Yeah, we are not doing like payment by result yet, but we definitely, like, our donors also care about the result they're making through their donations. So I think it's very important to like show the results and show the impacts in a very clear and way to the donors, and be able to, like, they are able to see what each dollar they're making, the impact. that's very important as a communication with the donors. So like our system, we are able to show that, like where the money goes, where actually which individual is receiving the donations, and how their works, how their life are going. But definitely on the other end, on the end beneficiaries, as I said, like I think it's not possible if we're just sitting in the office of New York and thinking about the question in Africa and thinking like what actually how we are going to measure the impact there. I think it's important for us like to go there and to understand what's the real situation there, and to understand like how we are able to measure the progress that we are making on the ground. So understanding the stakeholders is, I think it's very important when we think about like how do we define the success. It is not based on us, but it should be a conversation between us, the donors, and also and the end beneficiaries on the ground.
Thanks. And maybe just to rebound quickly on what both Tomicah and Jill were saying, I do believe that our starting point, at least, is that everything's broken. And in a way, it can feel like a pretty naive thing to do, to try to change the way that people give and the way that people invest in social impact, because we're just not used to it. We're not used to systematically tracking the impact of everything. Actually, if you look at the generally understood common, the common understanding of what a good charity is a charity that spends the least amount possible on overheads. And a good charity is a lean charity, which is, I'm French, I'm not going to ask you to pardon it, I'll keep it civil, but it's a really poor way of looking at it, because really, if you're saying that a good charity or a good NGO is a lean NGO, what you're effectively doing is disincentivizing investments in systems and people that allow you to really understand if you're moving the needle or not. And what payment by results is doing, the big opportunity there, is to radically change the way that we look at things and create incentives that, on the contrary, will systematically enforce the measurement of impact. It also gives us the opportunity to start from the bottom up rather than the top down. So there are a lot of frameworks. Amit was talking about it from Jin in one of the previous sessions. A lot of frameworks out there to measure impact, but nobody's really using them consistently. So is that really the right approach? Or should we be starting with projects on a project by project basis, tracking the KPIs that make sense for those projects, making those publicly accessible, share those, make them transparent, and then maybe cleverer organizations or machines, AI, etc., can start making sense of the patterns there, and we can start benchmarking and comparing projects as they go along. I think one of the other big opportunities is bringing beneficiaries or clients, however you want to call them, into the equation and empower them to be able to take a vote on the services that they want, to self-validate the services that they're receiving or benefiting from, because really that's what we're talking about with wallets in the blockchain space, and not just wallets to receive money. They're interfaces into these decentralized applications and a way to participate in new ways of governing services. Tomicah.
I was just going to say on that, it's going to take a wide diversity of approaches to get this right. We've been doing a lot of engagement, for example, with the government of Andhra Pradesh in India. This is the newest state in India. And by virtue of being the newest state, they have built out one of the most sophisticated data ecosystems that I've ever seen in the global south, certainly. And what they saw in some of their districts, which were about 3 to 9 million people recently, is that the blood markers for early onset diabetes, because they were getting aggregated health reports up from their citizens, were spiking. And this was a big problem, and they didn't quite know what to do about it. But then they had to think and ultimately decided that if they could divert brown rice into these districts as part of their food distribution schemes, they could solve that problem. And they diverted the brown rice, and it did solve the problem. And you had thousands and thousands and thousands of people who would have gotten diabetes who did not get diabetes because there was good data and a good response mechanism. If we can incentivize organizations in civil society and we can incentivize governments to operate on that basis going forward, all while maintaining very strong safeguards around the privacy of individual data, we're going to be living in a very different world. And that's what I think is really exciting. But if we can create, as you're alluding to, the feedback loops and the incentive structures that will encourage that type of data-driven intervention when things go wrong, that's what's going to change the dynamics.
So we were going to talk about, get further down the rabbit hole and talk about these more futuristic or esoteric tokenized financial mechanisms like token curated registries and bonding curves and things like that. But given the time that's available to us, it's probably best if we stop here for the time being. As I said, there is a session, a working group tomorrow to look at decentralized social finance and impact tracking. So you're welcome to come to that. And maybe we'll just open up the floor to any questions that you might have.
If anyone of you have a question. Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Talia Klein. I work for Digital Asset, which is a company based here in New York, original inventors of DAML, which was open source last month, a smart contract language. I'm curious, just from your perspective, how you choose for the different projects you work on. Tomicah, it sounds like you work on a number of different POCs, let's call them. How you choose the underlying technology that you're working on, and what makes different smart contracts language or platforms fit for purpose for each of the projects.
In our case, we've made a very deliberate decision since our earliest days to be platform agnostic and technology agnostic. So our goal is to solve the problem. And when we're working with a government or a foundation or another organization, our responsibility as fiduciaries of their resources and engagement is to get them the best possible solution. And by virtue of that, we've ended up using a lot of different solutions. We have built on Ethereum. We have worked with partners who built on Hyperledger and Bitcoin and an array of other blockchain platforms. What we see, and I don't think this is going to be revelatory to anybody in the room, is all of these platforms are good at different things. And that's great. We should embrace that. But I do think there is a danger in the early days of protocol development, and we are still in the early days of protocol development, in putting all of one's eggs, especially when it comes to social impact applications, in one platform basket. And so we think all of the platforms out there have comparative advantages, and that's great, but it's important to evaluate each one really thoroughly, and we have I think a 80-point checklist that we use, which we would be happy to discuss with you in greater detail, that we utilize for that purpose.
So just from our side, when we started in late 2015, early 2016, the only thing that was out there in terms of smart contract technology was Ethereum. So we started building on that. There were tons of issues with doing that, scalability in particular, and UX with gas costs and things like that. But I think the ecosystem has come a long way. But I think we're like Tomicah said, we're not blockchain agnostic because we're building on Ethereum, but we're actively looking at trying to integrate different technologies that make sense. So for example, now we are using what's called layer 2 scalability solution called Scale, which is a sidechain for Ethereum that allows us to process transactions really, really quickly. So we built a small wallet that's so simple even kids can use it with NFC, just tapping, a bit like Apple Pay, built on Scale but integrated with the Ethereum blockchain that allows you to have almost instantaneous payments. And we're certainly keeping an eye on the broader ecosystem. There are lots of questions around data privacy and selective disclosure mechanisms and all kinds of things. So it's not, even though we prefer to build on public blockchains because we think that's the only way that we can share data across the sector and not recreate silos, obviously there's some information that needs to be really heavily protected.
Hi, this is Andres Zeri from Colombia, South America. I have a question about open blockchains and that you just mentioned. And is that in Colombia, I'm going to give you an example of a use case and then the question. I come from Colombia. Colombia is supposed to be the best coffee in the world. You know, they grow the best coffee in the world. And I guess everybody here every day has a cup of coffee probably from Colombia or Brazil or even Vietnam. The thing is that these people in Colombia, they're getting sick and tired of all these intermediaries that are basically ripping them off. And people are getting so tired that they just don't want to grow coffee anymore. They just want to do something else because of all the intermediaries. So I see some companies that come with like blockchain platform solutions, and they say, okay, let's delete, let's get rid of all the intermediaries here. And then they don't realize that the big intermediaries are banks and governments, because they basically get their incentives, when it comes to game theory and Nash equilibrium about, cryptocurrency and blockchain. They don't know that the incentives are not there, that they come from, these governments and these banks that are basically, helping these big corporations to rip people off. So if you're not talking about open blockchains, how do you actually pretend to, implement a blockchain without getting rid of banks and governments? Thank you.
I'll start with that hot potato then. Sorry, you had a complimentary question?
Related to what Andres
Yeah.
asked. Brian Howman from the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. Do you run across problems like FATCA compliance and when you think about things like sales tax and that kind of thing? Do you run up, what kind of obstacles do you find in those frameworks for Ethereum blockchain?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it comes back to what I was saying before. As much as a lot of the ideology that drove blockchain technology at the beginning, Bitcoin and Ethereum, was about bypassing government, getting rid of all kinds of centralized authorities. The reality is that we have a very strong legal framework that we live in, and that's perhaps can become more efficient, eventually could potentially wither away into some kind of self-organized utopia where everything is tracked and everybody is like super happy and the machines have taken over anyway. But in the meantime, we need to make things work in the real world. And the way that I see it is public blockchains are the first step towards that. So there's 1.0 and there's 2.0. The best disinfectant is sunlight. Being able to, first of all, see the audit trails is something that in itself is revolutionary. Whether you're talking about foreign aid or supply chains or all the rest, you can see where things go wrong at the very least, and you can start making people accountable. And obviously the regulatory question is key. That's probably where we have most of our costs at the moment, is trying to figure out how we mesh the smart contract infrastructure with the contractual and compliance infrastructure, which is great for lawyers. I don't know who thought smart contracts were going to get rid of the legal industry, but.
So yes, I think there are so many intermediaries between us and the people like down on the ground, and that's also like what we try to eliminate through our process when we are trying to connect donors with end beneficiaries. But although through that process we are also working with the government, I felt like for our project, for example, we're now working in Uganda, and we actually got a lot of support from the Uganda government. The president of Uganda is like 70 years old, is an old gentleman, but when he heard about blockchain and cryptocurrency, he got excited, and he actually welcomed us to try it out in the country and try to see what the power like crypto and blockchain can bring to the country. So I think there are some people, like every government is trying to now studying on blockchain and crypto and trying to like incorporate that into their current system. I think like there are some people some countries might move ahead and try out but I think eventually it's a tool. I think we need to think about what regulators need and how we can actually assist them when they're figuring out the technology. So I think like conversations with the government and regulators is very important throughout the process.
Just one quick point on this. We see there's a great Dutch coffee company called Moyi that has built out a platform for Ethiopian coffee growers. And the supply chain integration is so tight that if you like the cup of coffee you're drinking at one of their shops in Amsterdam, you can tip the farmer that grew the beans in that cup of coffee using a digital token. So we're not, in that case, eliminating governments. We're not eliminating all intermediaries, but we are creating entirely new incentive structures that are going to encourage people on all sides of the equation to act differently and do things in a better way than has been possible in the past. And that's what I would suggest we should be focusing our energy on. Those that want to eliminate government are going to have a pretty tough time of things. You know, I guess maybe I wish you luck, maybe, but I don't really think so. If we're focused on solving real concrete problems, that seems like a much more effective use of everyone's time. And in the process, you'll have solutions emerge like compliance as a service that will make it a lot cheaper and a lot easier to deal with these things.
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Just when it was heating up. But as I said, there's a group tomorrow. Please grab any one of us during the conference as well. And thank you very much.